we've been doing this for a little while, and there's been many allusions to Thelema and the role of Thelema in ceremonial magic, and particularly the role of the Book of the Law, but we haven't really focused on that at all, so that's what I want to do today. The original comment I want to read out loud, because it's interesting, is, "Do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. The study of this book is forbidden. It is wise to destroy this copy after the first reading. Whoever disregards this does so at his own risk and peril. These are most dire. Those who discuss the contents of this book are to be shunned by all as centers of pestilence. All questions of the law are to be decided only by appeal to my writings, each for himself. There is no law beyond do what thou wilt. Love is the law. Love under will. The priest of the princes. Encore ma conchu." So, what does that mean, really? I have a couple of theories about this. Some people use this as an excuse not to talk about the book or not to study the book too closely. I always think that no one will want to do anything unless you forbid them from doing it. So, in a way, I see this as a form of incentive. But I don't think that was what Crowley was necessarily thinking at the time. This is the big deal. The hostility of the scribe towards Aiwass and towards the revelation that was happening is paramount to understanding how this book is important to Crowley's work, because initially he wasn't happy about this at all. He wasn't happy about most of the things he was hearing. He wasn't happy about what Aiwass was saying, and he wasn't happy about Aiwass's commands to spread this law. And over time, gradually, he became more invested in Thelema and more invested in Thelema, and taking up this cause more and more, until he was finally completely convinced. So it wasn't like he just got this thing and ran out telling everyone, "Oh, I just got this amazing prophecy." He was very hostile to the idea initially. I think what's important, and I think that we're all probably at least vaguely familiar with the history of the writing of the book and stuff like that. I'm not going to rehash this, because really if someone's not familiar with it, the best thing for them to do is look at Crowley's writings about it, and particularly in his Confessions, that his stuff about the experiences and circumstances of the writing of the book in there are very important to examine. And I don't want to rehash that. But it is important to look at Aleister Crowley as a person. The arrival of the Book of the Law symbolizes the changing of the eon, from the eon of the dying god, or Osiris, to the crowned and conquering child, or Horus. So why would they select Crowley to receive this in particular? Is, I think, the question that we should keep in the back of our minds here, because what Crowley is very clear about is that his own visions, the things that he sees in Liber 418, the things that he hears in the Book of the Law, and how the book proved itself to him, have a lot to do with his own personal life and his own personal experiences. And he does say at one point, this is never going to mean to other people what it means to me. And that's why we're asked to engage this text ourselves and find out what it means to us, but in the context of Crowley's comment. There's a certain amount of freedom, but there's also a certain ways that we can and can't take things. What the book is here to do, and our way of proving it, is to use the methods described to actually get in contact with these higher intelligences and learn about this kind of stuff ourselves, directly. This is why Crowley says, in a way, he draws a dichotomy between magic and religion, and says that Thelema, while it has religious characteristics and it addresses itself to the questions of religion, is ultimately a magical text. It's a Gnostic text. We are asked to learn about these things for ourselves and know about them for ourselves, not just by coming up with opinions or interpretations, but by actually getting in touch with entities that are capable of instructing us in this regard. I would make a where Crowley says magic and religion, I sometimes like to say it's either Gnostic or agnostic, because I think that there are a lot of agnostic religious people who do not engage their religious traditions through direct experiences. They get told what it is, and they just take what they're told, and they don't really try to go further with that. What Crowley says about this thing with higher intelligences that's really interesting is that ceremonial magic in particular gives us a language to talk to them, to communicate with these entities. And there's one point in his Confessions where Crowley says that anytime you introduce communication or a linguistic model into something, we start to see what we would describe as consciousness. He says, to plants we might seem to be unconscious because they don't communicate the way we do. They don't seem to interact with the world the way we do. So they have no means of communication with us, so that they appear unconscious to us, and we appear unconscious to them, in Crowley's example. But when you introduce a medium of communication, then all of a sudden the world starts to come alive, and the world starts to seem like a self-aware thing. And that's kind of the main point of Liber Al, and what makes it different from other religious texts. is it actually does have the instructions in how to do this, and introduces this model of communication, not just to symbols and images like in the astral plane, but to like ideas themselves. It gives us a way to directly engage ideas. Now, the central question of religion that Crowley sees this book addressing itself to, and the reason that Crowley sees religion as, in a sense, an inevitable function of human society, is the problem of suffering. As the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard said, few people turn to the book of Job when times are good. It's the kind of, you start to look seriously into life when you undergo a crisis. There's one point in Crowley's writings where he says that he thinks that if he has one power, one central power, it is to cause crisis in people's lives. And those crises, make people stronger, but also start to cause them to ask the questions that address themselves to these kind of issues, and make them want to have this kind of knowledge and these kind of experiences. That was one of Crowley's initial points of hostility to the Book of the Law, because there's one point at which Aiwass says, existence is pure joy, sorrows are but shadows. And that's kind of a slap in the face to anyone who's been through life, because it's not apparent necessarily from one's first engagement with life that existence is pure joy. And Crowley himself was a Buddhist at the time, which is a philosophy predicated on the notion that existence is suffering. So this essentially overturned Crowley's existing religious system, and he didn't like that very much. If we take this as the main question, and so how do we get through this idea of suffering and this idea of suffering through life, and how do we come to this point of view where we can see the world that way and see life that way and really experience the joy of life? Because the Book of the Law is a very joyful book. It's also a very aggressive book. It's got some scary things in it. It's got some references. It's a violent book. And in a sense, it's trying to bring joy to all these aspects of human life, which are sometimes ignored or shunned or frowned upon, and just to essentially eradicate the idea of shame and humility, which is paramount. There's one point where Crowley says that humility is completely disencountenanced by the Book of the Law. We're not supposed to be humble, we're supposed to be proud and lofty, which again flies in the face of pretty much every other religion that's out there. There's very few religions based on pride and loftiness. What is the symbolism of the system, or of the book, pardon me, is significant because it's sort of a combination of Christian ideas and Egyptian ideas. Obviously, in the book, Aleister Crowley is named the Great Beast. So, if you're looking at the Book of Revelations and you take the Great Beast seriously, then the Beast implies a second coming. There can't be one without the other. They're part of the same book, they're part of the same system, they're part of the same idea. So this is really important because Crowley had just come to the grade in his own initiation with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, where he was starting to learn about Enochian magic. Well, he'd already been studying Enochian magic, but it's sort of the grade that focuses on Enochian magic, which is keyed into the Book of Revelations immensely. I mean, that's sort of the whole point of the Enochian system, is to advance us towards this apocalypse, this revelation, literally apocalypse is revelation. And this book is a product of that in a very serious way, in a very important way. And Enochian is by far the most advanced of the magical systems that's out there. The Enochian angels said specifically, they thought that the Grimoire system was too scattered, it's all over the place, it's not consistent with itself, there's different writings that sort of have different significances. And this was their way of saying, okay, here's how you do all this stuff, and we're just going to give you one system to do it, and that's the watchtowers and the keys, and the language itself. The language is significant as well. So this is a product of the Enochian system as much as it is anything else. And I think that's important to bear in mind when we think about how Thelema demands that we practice ceremonial magic. And it really does demand that. There are people out there who they will describe themselves religious Thelemites, they try to become Thelemites and ignore the magic part or ignore the yoga part, and you just can't do it. It's clear that Crowley doesn't mean that to happen, and what you have then is not a Gnostic religion, but just a kind of identity. Someone's going through an identity crisis, and they see this very strong, powerful sounding book, and they say, okay, well, yes, I'm going to agree with this, but if they never actually engage these higher intelligences, they never actually directly communicate, then they're not finding anything out for themselves. And that is really what this book demands that we do. And Crowley believed very firmly,